Welcome, dear listener, to Candlelight Mysteries, where every whisper hides a truth and every shadow conceals a secret. Tonight, as the wind sighs against the glass and the flame trembles low, we invite you into another tale of suspense and candlelight. Let the mystery begin. Chapter 1: Atmospheric Arrival. The train hissed like a tired old creature as it pulled into Greyhaven Halt, a lonely countryside station half swallowed by fog. Twilight had drenched the moors in violet, and only the faint glimmer of lanterns along the platform stood as a reminder that people still lived in this forgotten corner of England. The signboard creaked on rusted chains, groaning each time the damp breeze swept across the line. Miss Jane Marple stepped onto the platform first, her gloved hands neatly folded atop the handle of her modest carpet bag. Her gentle eyes surveyed the surroundings the way a gardener might examine a troublesome patch of soil patiently, knowingly, with the quiet understanding that something beneath the surface was not quite right. "What a most singular atmosphere," came the crisp, assured voice of Hercule Poirot, who followed, adjusting his hat with fastidious precision. "A place that tries very hard to appear deserted and succeeds admirably. And yet," he added with a little flourish of his hand, "one feels that the village hides more life and more secrets than it pretends." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Yes, villages almost always do." The last man to descend, tall and sharply cut against the dimming sky, was Sherlock Holmes himself. He paused only briefly, his hawk-like eyes scanning the tracks, the station-master's cottage, the damp footprints on the platform that did not match the pattern of the departing passengers. Holmes murmured, almost to himself, "Strange. Someone left in great haste recently and toward the footpath leading into the marshland." Poirot gave a tiny, amused scoff. "My dear friend, always the bloodhound, Hayne. We have not even set foot in the village proper." Holmes did not respond. He was already walking. Miss Marple followed with unhurried steps. "Well now, I suppose our invitation to Greyhaven will begin sooner than expected." Fog closed around them like a curtain as they left the station. The trio made their way along the hedge-lined lane toward the village centre. Greyhaven was an old place, the kind that looked as though it had been carved out of the moor itself. Tall yew trees hunched over narrow stone cottages, their windows glowing faintly from oil lamps within. A church spire pierced the fog like a dark needle. Its bell tower held the stillness of abandoned places, yet an occasional echo hinted someone had been inside recently. "It is most curious," Poirot said, tightening his coat. "We are summoned here with no explanation, only a short letter begging for assistance with a matter, delicate and urgent, and yet no one appears to greet us." Holmes replied, "A letter signed by no one, only a seal representing a raven." "Oh, but surely someone wrote it," Miss Marple murmured thoughtfully. "People rarely choose symbols without meaning." Holmes nodded. "Precisely." As they rounded the lane toward the village inn, the lantern and ivy a lamp flickered behind the window. A hunched figure hurried across the lobby, then disappeared behind a doorway. When they stepped inside, the warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the hush of the room. The innkeeper, Mrs. Briarfield, appeared from the back, her eyes widening when she saw her guests. Oh dear. You are the ones who received the invitation, I suppose?" Poirot lifted an eyebrow. "Madame, you seem uneasy." Mrs. Briarfield hesitated, wringing her apron. "It's nothing. Only that Greyhaven has had too many strangers recently, and none for good reasons." Holmes stepped forward. "We were instructed to meet the sender of the letter at this inn." Mrs. Briarfield swallowed. "Yes, so you were. But I'm afraid the person who sent it is missing." A breath of silence swept across the room. Poirot leaned with sharp interest. "Missing, you say?" Miss Marple's eyes softened with concern. "Oh dear. How long?" "3 days." "Holmes, who was it?" Mrs. Briarfield's voice fell to a whisper. "Eleanor Ashcombe, the widow who lives by the marsh." A log snapped in the hearth, a sharp, abrupt crack that sounded far too much like a warning. After a brief exchange of uneasy glances, the trio settled at a corner table where Mrs. Briarfield brought tea, her hands trembling just enough for Miss Marple to notice. "She's frightened," Miss Marple whispered after the innkeeper left the table. "Not of us, of what she fears we may discover." Holmes placed the mysterious letter on the table. "3 detectives summoned to a remote village by a woman who disappears before we arrive. Too convenient to be coincidence." Poirot nodded. "Exactement. And the raven seal symbolic of omens, death, and secrets. One does not choose such a bird by happenstance." Miss Marple studied the seal thoughtfully. "Or perhaps Eleanor felt overshadowed by something, or someone. Ravens often watch over things from above, you see." Holmes tapped his fingers. "Mrs. Briarfield, says Eleanor, vanished near her home by the marsh, a notoriously treacherous region." Poirot pursed his lips. "Ah, the marsh, the perfect place for a misstep, an accident, or a crime hidden under nature's own fog." Holmes suddenly rose. "We will see the marsh tonight." Poirot nearly spilled his tea. "Tonight?" Miss Marple simply folded her shawl. "If the marsh is dangerous, Mr. Holmes, surely it is more so after dark." "Precisely," Holmes replied, "which is why whoever took Eleanor or caused her disappearance would rely on that very danger as a cloak." Poirot sighed dramatically. "Very well. But if I catch a cold, mon ami, I shall hold you personally responsible." Miss Marple stood calmly. "Danger rarely arrives with warning. It's best to meet it while we have some of our wits about us." Holmes gave her a small nod. "Indeed, Miss Marple." As they stepped out into the fog-thickened night, a distant sound echoed from the marsh, something between a low moan and the rustle of reeds. Poirot froze. "What was that?" Holmes listened, his expression sharpened. "Not the wind, something else." Miss Marple pointed gently. "Someone is there." A lone lantern swayed in the distance, vanishing slowly into the heavy mist. Holmes moved forward without hesitation. Poirot whispered, 3 days missing, and tonight the marsh calls to us." Miss Marple followed, her footsteps steady. Behind them, the inn door creaked shut like the closing of a chapter, or perhaps the first warning of many to come. Chapter 2. Local legends and early suspicion. The marsh at night was less a landscape and more a feeling of distance, of depth, of something watching from behind the veil of fog. The lantern they had seen from the inn now bobbed somewhere ahead of them, a faint, uncertain glow swallowed and released by the mist in slow, uncanny rhythms. Holmes walked in front, his stride purposeful, yet precise. He had produced a small, hooded lantern of his own from the inn borrowed, with Mrs. Briarfield's reluctant blessing, and held it low to illuminate the ground. Each tuft of grass, each smear of mud, each broken reed received his scrutiny. Miss Marple kept slightly behind, mindful of the treacherous path. She had lived most of her life on solid village lanes, but even she knew that marshes were not to be trifled with. Their trick was their resemblance to firm land until the moment you sank. Poirot, for his part, walked with exaggerated care, making a face each time his polished shoes encountered a patch of mud. "Mon Dieu," he muttered, "this is not terrain fit for a civilized man. The English countryside is always so wet." "Rain does tend to cause that," Holmes replied absently. "Do you see anything, Mr. Holmes?" Miss Marple asked gently, her voice barely above the soft whisper of the reeds. "Many things," Holmes said. "Most of them trivial. A dog passed here earlier today, medium size, short hair. A man followed, wearing boots with a narrow heel, worn inward on the left. He carries his weight unevenly. And—" He stopped, lantern angled toward a stretch of muddied earth where something had pressed deep into the ground. "And here the marks of a woman's shoe, smaller but heavier than you'd expect. She carried something in her arms, or she was pulled." Poirot stepped forward, peering down. "You are certain it is a woman?" "The style of the heel and the narrow arch," Holmes replied. Unless the men of Greyhaven have developed unique tastes in footwear, yes, a woman. Miss Marple bent closer, studying the pattern not for its logic, but for what it suggested of the person. The steps are close together and point off balance. She was frightened. People walk differently when they're afraid. Holmes gave her a brief, approving glance. The distant lantern ahead suddenly stilled, then dipped as if whoever carried it had crouched or fallen. For a moment it vanished entirely, then it flared again, wavering. Poirot stiffened. Someone is signaling, or in distress. Holmes moved ahead with more urgency. Stay close. The mire is treacherous here. They followed the faint glow until the fog opened enough to reveal a half-submerged, crooked wooden sign, leaning at a dangerous angle. The letters were worn but still legible where the lantern light touched them. Widow's Hollow. Miss Marple shivered. Holmes raised his lantern higher and called out, "Hello there, who goes?" The distant lantern jerked, then swung sharply away, moving quickly in the opposite direction, as if whoever held it wished to avoid them. Poirot frowned. Interesting. A person who does not want to be seen out here, at night, at the scene connected to a missing woman. It does not speak of innocence. No, Holmes agreed, it does not. Miss Marple's eyes moved past the retreating figure to a darker shape against the dimness, a squat, lonely cottage half sunk into the rise of land that bordered the marsh. Its roof leaned like an old woman's back, and a faint glimmer showed behind drawn curtains. "That will be Eleanor Ashcombe's home," Miss Marple murmured. Holmes followed her gaze. "And someone is inside." Poirot's moustaches bristled. "But the widow is missing. So who, then, visits her cottage in such secrecy?" Holmes narrowed his eyes. "Let us find out." They approached the cottage carefully, the ground firmer near the raised bit of land. Close up, the place looked even more forlorn. Ivy clung to the stone walls like desperate fingers, and the windows bore the faint smear of moisture and neglect. In the thin triangle of yard between cottage and marsh, a twisted hawthorn tree grew, its branches clawing at the sky. Holmes motioned for silence. He stepped to the side of the window and lifted the edge of the threadbare curtain with the tip of his slender cane, creating only the tiniest disturbance. Inside, a single candle burned. The room was small but tidy, with the plain but careful order of someone used to making the best of little. A rocking chair sat empty by the hearth, its cushions slightly indented as though someone had left it only moments before. There was no one inside. Holmes lowered the curtain and moved to the front door. The latch yielded under a light touch. "Unlocked," he murmured, curious for a woman who has reason to fear. "Unless," Miss Marple said softly, "she trusted whoever came here." Poirot clasped his hands together, or unless someone wished others to think that she trusted them. They entered quietly. The scent of lavender and peat greeted them, simple, domestic. A shawl lay folded on the table, beside a teacup with the faint ring of dried liquid at its bottom. A second cup stood opposite it, empty but with a faint mark of recent use at the brim. Miss Marple walked to the hearth, studying the mantel, where small framed photographs stood like sentries guarding the past. She noticed a younger woman in black beside a tall, unsmiling man, another photograph of the same woman with a small boy, and a faded picture of a group standing near what looked like the church in Greyhaven. One photograph frame bore a rectangle of dust where something had recently been removed. "That's very interesting," she murmured. Poirot turned. "You see something, mademoiselle?" "Something that was here but isn't now." Miss Marple pointed to the dust outline. "We often leave little ghosts of our decisions behind, especially on mantelpieces." Holmes had moved toward the table, examining the teacups. He lifted one, sniffed lightly, then set it down. Plain tea, no obvious trace of sediment. The second cup, however, he angled it under the lantern, has a faint rim of what appears to be sediment or residue, something added, sugar, perhaps, or something else. Poirot joined him, peering with a frown. "You suspect poison?" Holmes shook his head. "Not enough evidence to justify the word. But someone sat here with Eleanor Ashcombe not long ago, and what they drank was not identical. Miss Marple gently picked up the photograph of the woman and child. She lost her husband some years ago, I'm told. And the boy? Poirot watched her. Yes, Miss Marple, there is a story in your voice. There is always a story where there is loss, she said quietly, but we do not know that one yet. Holmes strode to a small writing desk near the window. It was neat, the surface clear, save for a small inkwell, a blotter, and a few sheets of paper. He opened the drawer. Inside lay envelopes, each bearing the same black wax seal, impressed with the image of a raven. He held one up. Our invitation. Poirot's eyes widened. Sacre, she was not content with merely one letter. There are several. Miss Marple joined them, her gaze soft but alert. Look, their one envelope is missing from the stack. There's a gap. Holmes counted quickly. 3 remain. The dust pattern suggests at least one more was present until recently, perhaps 2. So, Poirot said, she wrote to others, or prepared to. 1 letter went to us. The others? Miss Marple touched the desk gently, as if considering how a lonely widow might have sat there, wrestling with fear and resolve. Perhaps one went to someone in the village, or someone from her past. Holmes's attention drifted to the door. The lantern we saw belongs to someone who had reason to visit this cottage recently and who did not wish to be discovered. Or someone who knew Eleanor is missing and hoped to find something before we did, Poirot added. Miss Marple's gaze was distant. There is another possibility. Whoever came may have cared a great deal for Eleanor and now fears what has happened to her. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. We will know more in the daylight. For now, we risk lost footing if we stray too far into the marsh. Let us return to the village. Poirot did not argue. As they stepped outside again, Holmes paused, his eyes drawn upward. A lone raven sat perched on the twisted branch of the hawthorn tree, its feathers glossy even in the dim light. It regarded them with uncanny stillness. Your symbol, Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple said quietly. Poirot shuddered faintly. I do not care for omens, mademoiselle. They interfere with the little grey cells. Holmes, however, was looking at something else, a faint, broken trail of footprints leading away from the cottage, not toward the village, but skirting the marsh's edge in a path that suggested someone trying to avoid being seen. Someone left here in a hurry, he said, and not 3 days ago. More recent, within the last hour. Poirot's gaze followed the prints, then turned back toward the village, where the church spire rose above the fog like a dark finger pointing accusingly at heaven. A widow disappears, he mused softly. A mysterious visitor by night, and a village that pretends not to see. Tomorrow, my friends, we will talk to the people of Greyhaven, and we shall listen most carefully to their legends and their little lies. Miss Marple nodded. In my experience, Mr. Poirot, village legends are only old truths wearing costumes. Holmes smiled faintly. Then let us attend their little theatre in the morning. The following day broke reluctantly, as though morning herself hesitated to look too closely at Greyhaven. The sky was a pale, washed-out grey, and a thin drizzle dampened the cobblestones. Chimneys sent up lazy threads of smoke, and the smell of wet earth and coal mingled in the air. At the Lantern and Ivy, Mrs. Briarfield moved briskly between tables, laying out breakfasts, and pretending rather unsuccessfully not to glance repeatedly at their corner. Holmes sat with his back to the wall, sipping strong coffee and reading a slim local almanac he had commandeered from a shelf by the bar. Poirot delicately buttered a slice of toast with near-scientific precision, while Miss Marple contentedly stirred her tea, seemingly absorbed in the slow swirl of milk. It was Miss Marple who spoke first. People are terribly brave with their secrets, you know, she remarked quietly. Poirot looked up. Brave, mademoiselle, or fearful? Oh, fearful, certainly, she agreed, but it takes a kind of bravery to carry on living every day while hoping no one will notice what you're hiding. Holmes closed the almanac. We will find our first acquaintance at the church, I think. Villages like this cling to their clergy when there is trouble. So we shall go to pray? Poirot asked dryly. "To listen," Holmes replied. As they rose to leave, the inn door swung open and a gust of damp air rushed in, carrying with it a tall man in a dark coat and clerical collar. His hair was peppered grey at the temples, and his eyes, though lined with tiredness, held a keen intelligence. "Good morning, Mrs. Briarfield," he said, giving her a weary smile. "I fear the weather conspires to match our mood." Mrs. Briarfield bobbed a curtsy. "Good morning, Vicar Hargreaves." Holmes's eyes flickered with interest. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Miss Marple stepped forward with gentle grace. "Reverend Hargreaves, I presume?" The vicar turned. "Indeed. And you are our visitors. Mrs. Briarfield mentioned you arrived last night." Poirot gave a courteous bow. "Hercule Poirot, at your service, Monsieur le Vicaire. My companions are Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Miss Jane Marple." The vicar's eyebrows rose. "My goodness, we seem to have attracted a veritable constellation of—" he hesitated, searching for a neutral word, "investigative minds." Holmes answered evenly. "We received an anonymous summons, Reverend, from Eleanor Ashcombe." At the widow's name, the vicar's face tightened imperceptibly. It was a small thing, a flicker of grief, or something like it, but Miss Marple saw it clearly. "Yes," Vicar Hargreaves said softly, lowering his voice. "Poor Eleanor, there has been much talk." "How long have you known her?" Miss Marple asked, her tone as mild as if inquiring about the weather. "Since she came to Greyhaven," he replied. "Nearly 15 years now." Poirot watched him carefully. "And you believe she has simply gone off, of her own accord?" The vicar frowned. "Eleanor is not one for flights of fancy or sudden departures. She was a woman of routine." Holmes's voice sliced gently into the conversation. "You do not sound convinced by your own words, Reverend, nor surprised by her disappearance." The vicar regarded Holmes with a steady gaze. "Mr. Holmes, in the clergy, one learns to expect misfortune. That does not mean one becomes immune to it." "Quite so," Miss Marple murmured. "But learning to expect misfortune and expecting it in a particular case are rather different things." Vicar Hargreaves exhaled, defeated. "You are not wrong, Miss Marple. There has always been talk, whispers about Eleanor and Widow's Hollow. Some villagers believe the marsh claims those who are not meant to remain." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Ah, the local legend." The vicar nodded reluctantly. "They say Widow's Hollow was cursed long ago. A woman lost her husband and child there. They say she wanders still, in the fog, and that those who carry guilt in their hearts are drawn to the marsh to confess or to drown." Miss Marple's fingers tightened slightly around the handle of her handbag. "That's a very cruel story, for a place that has already seen so much sorrow." Holmes was less moved by the romanticism. Legends are rarely born from nothing. There was an event that started it, something the village has not forgotten. The vicar's gaze flicked briefly toward the church spire outside. "There was an incident, years before Eleanor came to Greyhaven, a death in the marsh, a child." Poirot leaned forward. "Whose child?" The vicar's voice dropped. "The Ashcombes, Eleanor's child." Silence descended like a heavy curtain. Holmes's eyes sharpened. "So the widow did not come here as an already made widow. She came bearing a tragedy." "Yes," Hargreaves said. "It was after that she came to live at Widow's Hollow. Some say she sought punishment. Others say she sought to be near the place where her child was taken." Miss Marple's voice trembled slightly, though her words remained composed. "Grief makes places sacred in strange ways." Poirot's gaze did not leave the vicar. "You believe someone in the village might be involved in her disappearance?" The vicar hesitated. "I believe that sorrows left to fester in silence grow strange roots. Eleanor had many secrets, and so do others in Greyhaven." Holmes murmured. "Now we approach the root of things." Miss Marple's eyes softened on the vicar's lined face. "Who disliked Eleanor, Reverend? Honestly now." "Dislike?" The vicar gave a humorless smile. "In a village, Miss Marple, dislike is rarely admitted openly." But if you wish to know who did not trust her, you might speak to Sir Reginald Carroway up at the manor. He always resented the way Eleanor's land bordered his. Poirot made a thoughtful sound. Land, always the land. It causes more quarrels than love ever did. Anyone else? Miss Marple prompted. There is Jonas Pike, Hargreaves added, the groundskeeper at the manor. He says the marsh is dangerous and that Eleanor encouraged foolish ideas about it. Holmes. And the doctor? Dr. Lydia Crowell, Hargreaves said. She visited Eleanor often, to check her health, she said. Some think she took a personal interest in Eleanor's state of mind. Poirot's eyebrows rose. And you, Reverend? Did you take an interest as well? Hargreaves's jaw tightened. My duty is to all my parishioners, including Eleanor. If she is dead, she deserves truth. If she is alive, she deserves to be found. Miss Marple watched him carefully, the faintest smile touching her lips. I believe you mean that, Vicar. People who speak of duty often do. It's when they don't mention duty at all that one begins to worry. Holmes picked up his hat. Thank you, Reverend Hargreaves. We will attend your service later, if you do not mind. I would be glad of the company, the vicar said. And, if you intend to go near Widow's Hollow again, I suggest caution. Some paths look solid until they decide not to be. Poirot muttered, That is precisely what I fear. As the vicar left, Mrs. Briarfield approached with forced cheerfulness. Will you be wanting more tea? Or perhaps, Holmes cut in smoothly, Mrs. Briarfield, who was the last person you know to visit Eleanor Ashcombe before she went missing. The innkeeper's hand trembled slightly on the tray. I don't rightly know, Mr. Holmes. Folks don't announce their comings and goings to me. Miss Marple's tone remained mild, almost apologetic. Oh, but I expect you do notice things all the same. Innkeepers usually do. It's hard not to. Mrs. Briarfield swallowed. Well, she had visitors now and then, the vicar, the doctor, and once or twice, Sir Reginald's man, Jonas Pike. Poirot gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. And you, madame? Did you visit? Mrs. Briarfield reddened. Sometimes, to take her bread or jam, she was a lonely soul. Her voice softened. But last week I haven't seen her since the evening she came here, to the inn. Miss Marple leaned forward. She came here? Yes. Sat at that very table you're at now, had a warm stew and some ale. Asked questions. Holmes, what sort of questions? Mrs. Briarfield's eyes flickered toward the door, then back. About folk who'd come to the village over the years, new faces, old quarrels. She asked about Sir Reginald, about Dr. Crowell, about Jonas Pike, asked if any of them ever spoke of the past. Poirot's interest sharpened. The past being? Mrs. Briarfield looked trapped for a moment, then sighed. The day her boy died, the day at the marsh. She said she was done being afraid of the truth. That's what she said, done being afraid. Miss Marple's fingers tightened gently around the edge of the tablecloth. Holmes's eyes brightened with cold light, and 3 days later she vanishes. Poirot smiled, a small, grim smile. So now we have it, a tragedy in the past, a woman determined at last to uncover it, and several people who may not wish it unearthed. Miss Marple's voice was soft, but steady. It's very dangerous to tell the truth in a place that's grown used to silence. People don't always thank you for it. Holmes stood. Then let us go where silence is thickest, the manor, the doctor's house, the marsh, and we will see which of Greyhaven's respectable citizens grows most uncomfortable when the past is mentioned. Poirot straightened his tie. And I shall watch their faces. The lies are always in the little things. Miss Marple picked up her hat, her eyes shining with a gentle sadness. And I shall listen to how they talk about Eleanor. You learn a great deal about people from whom they blame. As they stepped out into the damp grey morning, the village seemed to draw back slightly, as though bracing itself. The church bell tolled once in the distance, a hollow, echoing note that drifted across the moor. local legends whispered in the fog, and early suspicion had now found several names. Chapter 3. The Missing Person Case begins. Greyhaven's village square looked harmless in the morning light, quaint, even its cobbles slick with drizzle, and its shopfronts displaying the modest cheer of hand-painted signs and rain-washed windows. But beneath the gentle clatter of a horse-drawn cart and the murmur of villagers exchanging pleasantries lingered that invisible undercurrent of collective unease, the kind that settles over a place where something terrible has happened or is about to. Sherlock Holmes stood near the square's central fountain, a weathered stone basin featuring a winged cherub with a chipped nose surveying the crossroads of paths leading in and out of town. Holmes quietly murmured to himself, "The widow walked this way, recently, but not alone." Poirot joined him, pulling his coat tightly around himself. "Bon, let us recreate her final day, yes? Eleanor leaves her cottage, and then what?" Holmes nodded. From the Marsh cottage to the inn, Mrs. Briarfield's account confirms that. She was restless, asking questions, seeking old truths. Miss Marple came up behind them, gently adjusting her gloves. Her eyes scanned the villagers, noting how conversations died the moment the trio approached, how glances turned away or dipped, how some people stood too still, as though listening. "Fear changes how people speak," she said softly, "but it especially changes how they don't speak." Poirot sighed dramatically. "In my experience, silence shouts more loudly than words but requires twice the patience." Their first stop was Greyhaven General Store, a squat stone building with a bell that tinkled mournfully as they entered. Shelves of tins, soaps, bolts of cloth, and sweets lined the narrow aisles. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Alder, the middle-aged shopkeeper with a pinched expression that suggested she disapproved of far more things in life than she approved of. She stiffened as the trio approached. Holmes got straight to the point. "Mrs. Alder, Eleanor Ashcombe visited your store last week. I would appreciate your recollection of her purchase and behavior." Mrs. Alder fidgeted with a jar of barley sweets. I don't rightly remember." Miss Marple gave her a warm, reassuring smile. "Oh, I'm sure you remember quite well. People who run shops always notice what others overlook." Eleanor must have seemed troubled. Mrs. Alder hesitated. Poirot waited with polite stillness, arms crossed lightly, an eyebrow arched. Finally, she sighed. "Fine then." She looked distracted, kept glancing toward the door as if expecting someone, bought a tin of lamp oil, a loaf of bread, and some writing paper. Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Writing paper?" "Yes," Mrs. Alder said. "Said she needed to set some things straight. I didn't ask her what she meant. Not my business." Poirot stepped closer. "But you wondered, didn't you, even if you asked nothing?" Mrs. Alder colored slightly. "Well, she did look as though something had weighed her down for a long time, longer than 15 years if you ask me." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Some burdens grow heavier the longer you avoid them." Holmes added, "Did anyone speak to her, follow her, watch her leave?" Mrs. Alder bit her lip. "Not that I saw. But Jonas Pike was across the street, loading supplies into the manor cart." She lowered her voice. "He stopped to stare at her, quite fixedly if you ask me." Poirot's moustache bristled. "A stare of affection or resentment?" Mrs. Alder sniffed. "Jonas Pike doesn't do affection. And resentment? He carries it like a badge." Holmes exchanged a meaningful glance with his companions. "We'll speak with him." As they stepped back into the damp square, Miss Marple murmured, "Mrs. Alder knows more, but she won't say it yet." Poirot smiled wryly. "In my experience, people confess to Miss Marple long before they confess to the police." Holmes tilted his head in quiet agreement. "The psychological method. Very effective." Miss Marple only smiled faintly and moved on. The manor grounds of Sir Reginald Carroway sprawled over a gentle hill overlooking the village. The hedges near the carriage path were sculpted precisely, though with the unmistakable roughness of work done by someone who values efficiency over beauty. Standing near a stack of chopped wood, Axe in hand was Jonas Pike, broad-shouldered, middle-aged, with a perpetually sour expression etched into deep lines across his face. His clothes were work-stained, and his boots caked with mud that no path from the manor should have accumulated unless he had been somewhere else. "Mr. Pike," Holmes called as they approached. Jonas rammed the axe into the chopping block with a thud. "What do you want?" Poirot gave his most polite bow. "Information, monsieur, about Eleanor Ashcombe." Jonas spat to one side. "Haven't got any." Miss Marple studied him thoughtfully. "People don't dislike widows without reason, Mr. Pike." His jaw twitched. "Didn't dislike her, just didn't trust her. Difference." Holmes stepped around the woodpile, examining the man's boots with a keen gaze. "You've been in the marsh in the past 24 hours. Jonas stiffened. "I go where my work takes me." Holmes straightened. "The marsh is not the manor's work." Jonas glared. "You think you know everything, don't you?" Poirot interjected. "Tell us about last week, monsieur. You watched Eleanor come out of the shop, did you not?" Jonas's nostrils flared. "Maybe I did." "And you followed her?" Holmes asked calmly. Jonas's silence was damning. Miss Marple's voice softened like warm wool. "Why did you follow her, dear?" That broke something in him, just a crack, but enough. "I didn't follow her," Jonas muttered defensively. "I walked the same way is all. Path to the hollow runs past the old mill. Anyone might have been going that way." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "But not everyone pauses where the road bends and hides behind the hedge." Jonas's expression darted with flickering panic. "I wasn't hiding." Poirot folded his arms. "The truth, if you please. You feared something, or someone." Miss Marple added softly, "Or you feared what Eleanor might say." Jonas flinched, barely perceptible, but Holmes caught it instantly. Holmes stepped forward. "You knew she was asking questions, about the past, about the day her child died." Jonas's throat worked. She should have left it alone. Poirot's voice turned razor-sharp. "Why, Monsieur Pique? Because the truth is dangerous for someone?" Jonas suddenly grabbed the axe handle, gripping it tightly. For a tense moment no one moved. Miss Marple alone remained calm. "We know grief changes people," she said gently, "but fear changes them more." Slowly, painfully, Jonas released the axe. "I didn't do anything to her," he muttered. "I swear it. But someone else might have wanted to stop her digging." Holmes leaned in. "Who?" Jonas hesitated. Then, "Ask Sir Reginald Carroway," he whispered. "Ask him what he was doing the night Eleanor disappeared." Poirot and Miss Marple exchanged a look. Holmes smiled, not kindly. "We will." Sir Reginald Carroway met them in the manor's drawing-room, a high-ceilinged space decorated with portraits of ancestors who all seemed to glare down in stern disapproval. Carroway himself was a tall, aristocratic man in his 60s, with thinning silver hair and a moustache that drooped at the ends like a weary falcon's wings. He did not rise when they entered. "So," he said with cold politeness, "you are the investigators the widow summoned. Rather melodramatic of her." Poirot stiffened at the tone. "Sir Reginald, a woman has vanished. And yet the marsh has taken many before her. Why is this any different?" Carroway replied with a bored wave of his hand. Miss Marple settled into a chair quietly. "Because she did not go willingly, I suspect." Holmes added smoothly. "And because she had recently shown renewed interest in the tragic death of her child, a matter you are strangely uninterested in." Carroway's eyes flickered for the first time. Poirot seized the moment. "Where were you the night Eleanor disappeared?" "That is none of your concern." Holmes smiled thinly. "That is precisely what makes it interesting." Carroway glared. "I was at the manor all evening." "With witnesses?" Poirot pressed. "My household staff can attest to my presence." Holmes's voice remained silky. "And yet Jonas Pike claims he saw you walking near the marsh path that night." Carroway stiffened visibly. "Jonas Pike is a liar." Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. "People often call others liars when they themselves are frightened of being believed. Carroway's eyes flashed with anger. That woman, Eleanor, was consumed by her own guilt. She should never have been living near Widow's Hollow. It fueled her delusions. Poirot paused. "You speak as though the past tortures you as well." Carroway exploded suddenly. "The past tortures this entire cursed village. Her boy drowned. It was a tragedy, not a conspiracy." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "And yet she believed otherwise." Carroway fell silent, chest heaving slightly. Miss Marple tilted her head. "Sir Reginald, if Eleanor's child's death was truly accidental, why does the subject upset you so?" His face drained of colour momentarily. Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, there it is." Holmes stepped forward. "Sir Reginald, did Eleanor threaten to expose something, to reveal something from that night?" Carroway's fingers tightened on the arm of his chair. "I told her," he said at last, voice hoarse, "to let sleeping ghosts remain where they belong." Poirot leaned closer. "And when ghosts do not sleep?" Carroway swallowed. "They come back," he whispered. The room fell silent. Holmes folded his arms. "You are hiding something, Sir Reginald, perhaps not murder, but something connected to that night." Carroway closed his eyes. "I cannot speak of it, not yet." Miss Marple's expression softened. "You will," she said gently. "People always do when the weight becomes too heavy." Holmes turned sharply. "We are done here, for now." As they left the manor, Poirot whispered, "He fears the truth, perhaps because it touches him, perhaps because it implicates someone he cares for." Miss Marple nodded. "And people protect those they love, even from consequences." But Holmes was focused on something else entirely. "The puzzle grows clearer," he murmured. "Eleanor did not disappear because of a new threat. She disappeared because she unearthed an old one." They paused at the crest of the hill overlooking the marsh, where the fog lay thick as wool. Poirot wrapped his coat tighter. "And what now?" Holmes answered simply, "Now we begin the true investigation." Chapter 4. Descent into the dangerous location. By late afternoon, the light over Greyhaven had thinned into a pale, watery haze. The fog rolled in waves from the marshland like a living thing, curling, coiling, erasing the world by layers until even the village chimneys vanished into milky oblivion. Holmes stood at the edge of the marsh path, his long coat caught in the wind, eyes narrowed as if trying to see through the very nature of the fog. Beside him, Poirot frowned deeply at the mud darkening his pristine footwear, while Miss Marple fastened her shawl tighter against the sudden chill. Holmes spoke first. "Eleanor disappeared somewhere between the path dividing the old mill and Widow's Hollow," he said. "If she sought answers, the hollow is where the truth led her." Poirot shuddered slightly. The hollow, where legends speak of ghosts and wandering widows, a place where the guilt-ridden are lured to their doom. "We?" Miss Marple gave him a kind smile. "Stories try to explain what logic cannot, Mr. Poirot, but fear makes people very imaginative." Holmes angled his lantern forward. "We proceed, slowly, stay exactly on my steps." The marsh opened before them like a patient predator. The ground grew spongy beneath their feet. Every step produced a quiet sucking sound as the earth resisted release. Tall reeds swayed without wind, brushing their coats with feathery, damp fingers. Pools of dark water reflected nothing, not sky, not shape, not movement. Holmes kept his lantern low, illuminating dips and soft patches that would swallow a careless foot. Poirot muttered, "If I die in this mud, I expect a most elegant epitaph." Miss Marple chuckled gently. "Oh, I'm sure someone will write it very prettily, Mr. Poirot." Holmes suddenly halted. He crouched, lowering the lantern. Fresh impressions. Poirot leaned in, balancing precariously on the firmer edge of the path. "Footsteps?" Holmes nodded. "A woman's prints, same size as those at Eleanor's cottage, days old." Miss Marple bent slowly, examining the surrounding marks. "But look, here are other prints on top. Someone else came after her." Holmes's gaze sharpened. A man, heavy, deep stride, and interesting he drags the right foot slightly. Poirot stiffened. Jonas Pike? Miss Marple whispered. Oh dear. Holmes shook his head. The stride is wrong for Pike. Too long, he pointed. More like Sir Reginald, in fact. Poirot inhaled sharply. Carroway lied. Or left something out, Miss Marple murmured kindly. Holmes stood. We continue. They moved forward until the path dipped sharply downward, revealing a hollow in the landscape, an almost bowl-shaped depression filled with swirling fog. Dead trees rose like skeletal fingers from black pools, birds long fled. Widow's Hollow. Poirot swallowed. I do not care for places that appear designed to swallow visitors. Miss Marple stepped ahead, voice gentle but unwavering. Every place has its own sadness, Mr. Poirot. This one simply hasn't been healed yet. Holmes raised his lantern higher. Something glinted from the middle of the hollow. A metallic reflection, he murmured, possibly from an object dropped or deliberately placed. They descended slowly into the grey bowl. Holmes's voice cut through the quiet. Stay close. The ground here is deceptive. Poirot scowled at a patch of mud that nearly claimed his shoe. Deceptive? It is downright malicious. Miss Marple stopped suddenly. Look. On a cluster of reeds lay a strip of patterned fabric blue with faint white stitching, torn, damp. Poirot gasped softly. A woman's scarf. Holmes examined it. Not torn by accident, this was ripped, possibly in a struggle. Miss Marple's voice softened. I've seen this pattern before. Eleanor wore scarves like this. Holmes looked up sharply. Then we are close. The fog thickened, the air turning colder, heavier. Something about the hollow whispered danger. At the bottom of the hollow, half hidden under twisted roots, stood what looked like the entrance to an old footpath, overgrown, unmarked, forgotten. Holmes approached it with measured caution. Poirot frowned deeply. This is not a marked path. Why would Eleanor go through there? Miss Marple answered quietly. Because someone told her something, or she remembered something. Holmes knelt again, studying the earth. More prints. Eleanor again, and the male prints over top. Poirot murmured. He followed her. Holmes nodded. Not in stealth. The stride lacks hesitation. He intended to catch up. Miss Marple's face tightened with distress. And did he? Holmes stood. We shall find out. They pushed into the path, which wound like a serpent between brambles. The air grew colder still, and moisture dripped from branches like slow tears. Broken twigs and snapped reeds suggested recent movement. Poirot whispered, It is as if the nature itself conspires to hide the truth. Holmes made a quiet sound. Nature hides nothing. Men do. Miss Marple added softly, Sometimes women too. They walked deeper until they came upon an odd depression in the ground. Holmes raised his lantern. The shape was unmistakable, an imprint of someone kneeling or collapsing. Poirot inhaled sharply. Mon Dieu. Miss Marple touched Holmes's arm gently. See the pattern beside it? Holmes angled the light. Yes. Beside the depression, imprinted faintly in the dirt, was the shape of fingers dragging. Holmes whispered, Someone fell, and someone else dragged them onward. Poirot checked the ground. The male steps lead forward, and here. He froze, pointing. A small silver brooch lay half buried in mud. When Miss Marple picked it up and cleaned it with her handkerchief, her breath caught. It's Eleanor's. She wore this on her coat each winter. Holmes's eyes darkened. This is no longer a missing person case. This is an abduction. Poirot spun sharply. The man dragged her deeper into the marsh? But that would be suicide. Holmes replied, unless he knew a safe route. Poirot's eyes widened. A local. Miss Marple whispered, Someone who knew the legend. Holmes nodded grimly. Someone who knew Widow's Hollow well enough to weaponize fear. Poirot exhaled slowly. The suspects multiply. No, Holmes said. They narrow. He stepped forward carefully into the deepest part of the marsh, and immediately stopped. Miss Marple saw it too. A rope, frayed, wet, strung between two half-rotted posts. A guide rope, Poirot whispered, for someone crossing the marsh, deliberately. Holmes nodded. Only a few villagers would know this secret path. Miss Marple said quietly, someone led Eleanor here, someone she trusted enough to follow. They looked at each other. A chilling realization hung in the fog. They followed the guide rope slowly, the muddy water rising nearly to their ankles. The rope led them around a deep sinkhole. One step in the wrong direction would have swallowed any of them whole. Poirot trembled. The marsh demands respect, but it gives none. Miss Marple whispered, poor Eleanor, coming here alone, with someone behind her. Holmes raised the lantern, revealing the shape of an abandoned stone foundation, half submerged, drowned by the marsh and time. What is this place? Poirot asked. Miss Marple frowned, peering at the mossy stones. An old cottage foundation, long gone, Holmes murmured, or long hidden. A gust of wind scattered fog across the hollow, revealing a broken wooden beam bearing faint letters. Poirot squinted. W.A.S. Holmes completed it. W. Ashcombe. Miss Marple's eyes widened with sorrow. This was their home, the place where Eleanor lived with her husband and child. Poirot's breath caught. Then this is the site of the accident. Miss Marple quietly corrected him. The site of the tragedy, accident, that remains to be seen. Holmes stepped into the ruined foundation, eyes scanning every inch, the scattered stones, the dark pools collecting rainwater, the traces of older fire pits. Then something glimmered under the water. Holmes knelt instantly. He reached into the cold marsh water and pulled out. A locket. Poirot gasped. Another of Eleanor's belongings? Holmes opened it carefully. Inside was a faded photograph of Eleanor holding her infant boy. Miss Marple touched the edge. This must have been lost on the day the tragedy occurred. She would never have willingly misplaced it. Holmes turned the locket over. Scratched into the back, so faint it was nearly invisible, were two initials. R.C. Poirot's face drained of colour. Reginald Carroway. Holmes stood. He was there that day, not afterward, not hearing of it. There. Miss Marple's eyes glistened, and Eleanor only recently realized it. Poirot whispered, that is why she wrote the letters, why she sought help. Holmes's voice was cold and sharp as winter air. She confronted him. Miss Marple nodded, or threatened to. Poirot swallowed. Then Sir Reginald followed her into the marsh that night? Holmes did not answer. Miss Marple did. He followed her now. Holmes turned sharply. Precisely. Poirot frowned. But if he dragged her deeper into the marsh, where is she now? Holmes lifted his lantern toward the fog-choked path ahead. Only silence answered. Miss Marple's voice trembled with fear. She's still out there, somewhere. Poirot swallowed. Alive? Holmes clenched the locket. That is what we must determine. He pointed toward the deep marsh path, thick with fog and danger. Because wherever Eleanor went, she did not go willingly. The fog swallowed their silhouettes as they stepped deeper into Widow's Hollow, the marsh behind them whispering secrets, the locket cold in Holmes's hand. The descent had truly begun. Chapter 5. Suspects, Lies, and Psychological Cracks. By the time they returned from Widow's Hollow, the fog had begun to disperse, leaving the village exposed under a pale grey sky. As Holmes, Poirot, and Miss Marple walked along the lane toward Dr. Lydia Crowell's surgery, the sharp scent of disinfectant drifted from the building, mingling with the smell of damp earth. The doctor's modest cottage doubled as her practice. A brass plaque by the door read L. Crowell, Physician. A single window glowed with lamplight within, though the hour was still early for evening. Poirot brushed dirt from his coat with a grimace. I hope, at least, that the good doctor appreciates clean boots. Holmes raised an eyebrow. I rather suspect she appreciates far more unusual things. Miss Marple smiled gently. Doctors often hear too many secrets for their own comfort. Holmes knocked. Dr. Crowell opened the door almost instantly, as though she had been pacing within. She was a woman in her early 40s, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles, her composed exterior cracked only slightly at the sight of her visitors. "Ah," she said quietly, "so you've come." Her tone held neither surprise nor welcome. Holmes spoke first. "You were one of the last people to see Eleanor Ashcombe alive." Dr. Crowell stepped aside, allowing them in. "Then let's discuss it properly." The surgery smelled of tinctures and dried herbs. Shelves of bottles lined one wall, while a curtained examination area occupied the corner. The doctor remained standing, arms crossed. "Eleanor came to me last week. She complained of restlessness, trouble sleeping, recurring memories. I believed she was experiencing late-stage grief resurfacing." Miss Marple's voice was soft. "After 15 years?" Dr. Crowell nodded slowly. "Trauma has no timetable, Miss Marple. It returns when the mind decides it must." Poirot raised a brow. "She asked you questions, did she not? About her child? About the past?" "Yes," Dr. Crowell admitted. "She believed she had begun to remember things from the night of the tragedy, details she had previously blocked out." Holmes leaned forward. "What sort of details?" She hesitated. For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Worry. "She spoke of voices," Dr. Crowell said quietly. "Raised voices, a quarrel, footsteps running, a man shouting, a splash." Miss Marple's eyes glistened. "Oh dear." Poirot's moustaches stiffened. "A man shouting? She recognized him?" Dr. Crowell swallowed. "She believed she did. She said the memory frightened her. She did not tell me the name, but she kept repeating, 'He was there. He was there.'" Holmes exchanged a subtle glance with Poirot. "And what did you believe, Doctor?" Crowell's composure cracked fully now. "I believed," she stopped. "You must understand. Eleanor had become obsessed. She came to me again 2 days later and asked for a sedative. She said she needed calm before she confronted someone." Poirot leaned in. "Someone being?" She shook her head. "She wouldn't tell me." Miss Marple asked gently, "Did you give her the sedative?" "Yes," Dr. Crowell confessed. "A mild one." Poirot's eyes sharpened. Holmes asked softly, "You don't appear convinced she is simply missing." Dr. Crowell's voice dropped to a near whisper. "I fear she has remembered something dangerous, something someone wanted forgotten." Miss Marple nodded sadly. "That seems increasingly clear." Holmes pressed, "And where were you the night she disappeared?" Dr. Crowell straightened. "Here, alone. I have no alibi." Poirot sighed. "How very convenient." Miss Marple stepped in gently. "Doctors often have no company but their work, Mr. Poirot." Dr. Crowell looked relieved that at least one of them understood. Holmes tapped his fingers lightly on the desk. "Doctor, is there anything you haven't told us?" She hesitated one moment too long. Poirot pounced. "Ah, a hesitation. You conceal something." Dr. Crowell's shoulders slumped. "Yes," she whispered, "but I cannot say it yet, I promised Eleanor." Miss Marple's voice was soft, steady. "People make promises when they hope for safety, but she is not safe, Doctor." Dr. Crowell closed her eyes, fighting the conflict, tightening her jaw. Holmes recognized the psychological fracture. A crucial one. He rose. "We will return." As they stepped into the cold air, Poirot muttered, "She knows something, something vital." Miss Marple whispered, "And something heartbreaking." Holmes nodded. "And it is tearing her apart." Returning to the lantern and ivy, they found the inn strangely empty. Only Mrs. Briarfield stood behind the counter, wiping it with far more energy than necessary. Holmes approached slowly. "Mrs. Briarfield, we need to speak with you." She froze mid-wipe. Poirot leaned forward. "You lied to us." She gasped softly. What do you mean? Holmes placed the torn scarf on the counter. You told us Eleanor came here asking simple questions, that she seemed restless, but she was terrified. You know that. Mrs. Briarfield's eyes filled with panic. I only said she seemed uneasy. Miss Marple's voice, calm yet penetrating, cut through the lie. My dear, people only look like that when they've learned something terrible. Mrs. Briarfield broke. Tears flooded her eyes. Her voice trembled. I didn't want to involve myself. Eleanor begged me not to. Poirot pressed. What did she tell you? Mrs. Briarfield gripped the counter to steady herself. She said she finally knew who was in the marsh with her child that night. Holmes's breath hitched barely, but Poirot noticed. Miss Marple took a step closer, compassionate. Whom did she name, dear? Mrs. Briarfield shook her head violently. I can't say. I promised her if anything happened to her, I wouldn't reveal it unless I was certain. Holmes's voice was gentle but relentless. Something has happened to her, Mrs. Briarfield, and certainty is the only way we will find her. Mrs. Briarfield stared at him, fear battling guilt. Then her lips trembled. It was... Her voice cracked. She shook her head again, backing away. I can't be the one. Poirot clenched his fists. This village is choking on secrets. Holmes breathed in sharply. Enough! She will speak when she breaks further, not before. Miss Marple nodded sadly. People can only reveal the truth when their fear loosens its grip. Mrs. Briarfield sobbed. But one phrase slipped through her tears. Quiet, unintentional, devastating. She trusted the wrong person. Poirot froze. Which person? She choked on the words. Miss Marple gently patted her hand. We understand, truly. Holmes stepped outside. His voice was ice. Sir Reginald Carroway. Poirot sucked in a sharp breath. It leads back to him again. Miss Marple frowned, troubled. It might, but sometimes danger comes from a direction one cannot bear to suspect. Holmes looked at her curiously. Miss Marple had noticed something he had not. She quietly tucked that thought away. The church stood solemn and grey under the dimming sky, its tall windows glowing faintly with candlelight. The trio entered through the heavy wooden doors, finding Vicar Hargreaves kneeling near the altar, deep in prayer. His shoulders trembled, and when he rose, his eyes were red-rimmed. Poirot whispered, We interrupt a man in grief. Holmes replied, All guilt. Miss Marple simply stepped forward kindly. Reverend, may we speak with you? He nodded slowly. I knew you would come. They sat in the small pews near the front. Holmes began. You knew Eleanor well. Hargreaves nodded stiffly. Yes, she came here often, seeking comfort. Poirot leaned in. Comfort or confession? Hargreaves winced. Miss Marple's gentle tone soothed the air. Sometimes people confess not sins but fears. The vicar closed his eyes. She remembered something, I could tell. She asked about the baptism records, old ones, from the year her child died. Poirot stiffened. Why would she need those? Hargreaves whispered, Because she feared. She feared the tragedy was not what she believed. Holmes's breath sharpened. She suspected foul play. Hargreaves opened his eyes, haunted. She asked me whether a record could be altered, whether a name could be added or removed. Poirot gasped. Removed? Miss Marple's eyebrows knit with deep understanding. She feared her child's story was rewritten. Holmes rose abruptly. This changes everything. Vicar Hargreaves suddenly gripped Holmes's arm. There's more, he whispered. Something I never told the police. Something I've kept hidden for years. Poirot's voice dropped to a dangerous softness. Speak. Hargreaves trembled. The night her child died, I heard shouting from the marsh. A man shouting, but I was young then, afraid to get involved. Holmes's jaw tightened. Who was the man? The vicar's voice broke. I think it was Sir Reginald Carroway, Poirot exhaled. We suspected as much. But Hargreaves shook his head violently. No, you misunderstand. His voice fell almost to a whisper. Sir Reginald wasn't alone. Holmes's eyes widened. Poirot straightened. Miss Marple's hands tightened together. The vicar continued, voice shaking. There were 2 men. Holmes froze. Poirot whispered, 2? Yes, Hargreaves whispered, and Eleanor knew one of them. Miss Marple's voice trembled gently. Oh my. Holmes demanded sharply, names. But the vicar shrank. I don't know the second man's name, but I remember the voice. I have heard it again in recent years. His eyes lifted to theirs, anguished. Afraid, Holmes whispered. Whose voice, Reverend? The vicar swallowed hard. I cannot say yet, but you must be careful. This village hides a sin older and deeper than you realize. Poirot stood, trembling with controlled fury. Then someone alive today is responsible for Eleanor's suffering. Miss Marple whispered, and perhaps her disappearance. Hargreaves bowed his head, tears slipping silently. Holmes stepped back, cold resolution settling over him. We will uncover the truth, he said, whether Greyhaven wishes it or not. As they left the church, the evening fog rose again, thicker, darker, colder. Poirot whispered, we have suspects who lie, fear, and crack behind polite smiles. Miss Marple murmured, and one of them holds the final piece. Holmes clenched his fist. The past is unraveling, he said, and tonight the lies will begin to break. They stepped into the heavy fog, the church bell tolling behind them, echoing through Greyhaven like a warning. The psychological cracks had begun. Chapter 6. Night Investigation and Overheard Confession. Night fell over Greyhaven like a velvet curtain, soft yet suffocating. The village lamps flickered in the wind, their glow barely penetrating the thickening fog that pressed against windows like unwelcome hands. The trio had agreed earlier that the truth would not be found in parlours or sitting rooms. Not tonight. Holmes walked ahead with his long strides slicing through darkness, a freshly lit lantern swinging from his hand. Poirot followed, grumbling under his breath about damp night air and the treachery of English weather. Miss Marple, calm and steady, kept pace with surprising grace for someone her age. Holmes spoke quietly as they left the safety of the village lane. The vicar's revelation is key. 2 men in the marsh that night. One he believes was Sir Reginald, the other unidentified but familiar. Poirot adjusted his coat collar, which means the man is still in Greyhaven. Miss Marple nodded. People rarely leave the places they've sinned in. They fear their ghosts may follow. Holmes turned slightly. Tonight, we listen. As they reached the outskirts of the marsh, the wind dropped suddenly so sharply that the trees stilled mid-sway. The quiet that followed was unnatural, heavy, as though the hollow itself held its breath. Poirot muttered, Bah! Even the air plots against us. Holmes lifted the lantern, casting long, trembling shadows over the reeds. Then, a faint glow appeared in the distance. A lantern, swaying, moving slowly toward Eleanor's ruined foundation. Poirot stiffened. The same mysterious lantern we saw the night we arrived. Miss Marple whispered, Someone returns to the place of the tragedy, to check something. Holmes narrowed his eyes. No one revisits Widow's Hollow at night without a reason, and fear is the strongest reason of all. He extinguished their lantern with a swift motion. Poirot gasped. Are you mad? We must move unseen, Holmes whispered sharply. They crouched, moving silently among the reeds. The earth beneath them squelched softly. Miss Marple navigated each step with surprising precision. Decades of walking village footpaths had given her expertise in reading uncertain ground. The distant lantern lowered, then rose again. Someone had stopped, listening. Holmes motioned for complete silence. A silhouette materialized through the fog, tall, broad-shouldered. moving with the slow hesitation of someone burdened by dread. Poirot whispered, "C'est lui. This is a guilty man." Miss Marple whispered, "Or a broken one." Holmes remained still. "We will observe." The figure reached the overgrown foundation. He looked around nervously, then knelt among the stones near the locket's former resting place. From this distance, they could not see his face, but his voice carried trembling, thick with regret. "Oh God, Eleanor, forgive me." Poirot inhaled sharply. Miss Marple touched her chest gently. Holmes leaned forward, quiet. The silhouette clutched something, a small, dark object, and pressed it to his forehead. I tried to stop him that night. I swear it, but I was too late." Miss Marple's hand trembled. "Oh dear," Poirot whispered. "Who is he? Who speaks such words?" But before Holmes could answer, the man continued his confession, spilling into the fog. "I never meant for any of it. Your boy, your sweet boy. I should have told you years ago." Poirot gripped the edge of the marsh grass. "Mon Dieu." Holmes's breath tightened. He is confessing, unbidden. This is not a performance. Miss Marple's voice cracked with emotion. "Then he is not the one who dragged her away." Holmes nodded. "No, he is haunted, not triumphant." Poirot whispered, "But where is Eleanor?" The man's voice broke into raw pleading. "I didn't hurt you. I only followed, to warn you. Oh God, forgive me, please." He dropped to his knees, sobbing. Miss Marple whispered, tears in her voice, "A heart breaking will always tell the truth." The man rose shakily, stumbling back toward the village. As he passed closer through the fog, Holmes's eyes flashed. "It's Jonas Pike." Poirot's eyes widened. "He tried to stop the tragedy?" Miss Marple's expression softened in sorrow, or feared the truth of it all these years. Holmes whispered, "This changes everything." As Jonas Pike disappeared into the mist, the trio remained crouched, stunned by the raw confession that hung in the cold air. Poirot whispered, "We must confront him. Get the rest." Miss Marple shook her head gently. "Not yet. Tonight was the truth of his heart, not his mind. If we corner him now, fear will make him lie." Holmes nodded. "Agreed. There is more to gain by listening." Suddenly, a twig snapped behind them. Holmes twisted instantly, silent as a striking adder. Poirot flinched and stumbled. Miss Marple merely turned with controlled grace. Someone else was here. Someone far quieter than Jonas Pike. A second silhouette lingered deeper in the fog, motionless, half hidden behind the twisted hawthorn tree. Poirot whispered, "Another listener." Miss Marple's voice lowered. "Someone who followed Jonas, someone who knew he might speak." Holmes leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Too tall to be Dr. Crowell, too thin to be Sir Reginald. "But someone local," Poirot muttered. Holmes raised his head slowly, sniffing the air like a hunting hound. "A faint scent," he murmured. "Oil, coal dust." Poirot stiffened. "The vicar's candles?" "No," Holmes whispered. "Something stronger. The scent from the old mill." Miss Marple gasped very softly. "The miller, Thomas Reed." Poirot frowned. "The miller? He was never in our suspect list." Holmes whispered, "Which is precisely why he is dangerous." The figure behind the tree stepped backward, melting into the fog before any of them could move. Holmes lunged after him, but Miss Marple caught his sleeve. "Mr. Holmes, no, not in this fog. The marsh will swallow you." Holmes hesitated just one frozen heartbeat, then relented. Poirot muttered, "So the miller listens to confessions in the dark? Curious." Miss Marple sighed. "People with heavy secrets always listen too closely." Holmes exhaled sharply. "Two men at the marsh, one haunted, one silent." Poirot whispered, "And the silent one is the dangerous one." Miss Marple looked toward the hollow, voice trembling with intuition. "And somewhere out there, Eleanor needs us." Holmes insisted they wait in silence for several minutes, listening, watching, ensuring no further footsteps disturbed the marsh's deathly quiet. Only the slow drip of water from the reeds broke the hush. Poirot muttered, "This place wears on the nerves." Miss Marple, however, was listening to something the other two had not yet noticed, a faint, rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 tap. Holmes instantly raised his head. "You hear it." Poirot strained. "I hear nothing." Miss Marple whispered, "It's coming from the west bank." Holmes lowered himself, placing his ear nearly to the ground. Tap, 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 tap. His eyes widened. "That," Holmes whispered, "is not natural." Poirot blinked. "What does it mean?" Miss Marple's heart fluttered. "Someone is signalling." Holmes rose sharply. "And not with purpose of navigation. This is distress, a repeated pattern." Poirot gasped. "Morse code?" Holmes nodded. "Simplified, faint, but intentional." Miss Marple placed a hand on her chest. "Then someone is alive out there." Holmes held up a hand, focusing. The taps became clearer as they moved toward the west bank, Holmes leading, Poirot stumbling behind, Miss Marple steady as a shadow. Tap, 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 tap. Poirot's eyes widened. Sauce, in rhythm, if not in perfect form. Miss Marple whispered, "Someone is trying to be found." Holmes's voice was low, dangerous. "Eleanor." They pushed through the thick reeds until Holmes abruptly stopped at the edge of a large, dark pit of water. The mud around it was disturbed. "Dragged," Poirot whispered. "Dragged. We saw drag marks earlier." Holmes knelt at the edge. "Eleanor!" Holmes shouted into the darkness. Silence. Then a faint cry. Weak, thin, terrified. Poirot stumbled back. "Mon Dieu!" Miss Marple clutched Holmes's arm. "She's alive!" Holmes lowered himself carefully. The pit had a submerged shelf, an area where someone could cling if they fell in or were pushed. He lowered the lantern. A pale hand appeared through the black water, trembling. Poirot gasped. "There! There!" Holmes reached down without hesitation, gripping the wrist with a strength that belied his slender frame. "Hold on," he growled. "We've got you." Miss Marple knelt beside him, voice soft as silk. "You're safe now, dear. Hold tight." A weak, broken whisper rose from the darkness. He said, "He'd come back. I hid. Poirot trembled. "Who, madame? Who?" Holmes pulled harder. "Not now, Poirot." With a final wrench, Holmes dragged Eleanor Ashcombe from the pit. Drenched, cold as death, but alive. Miss Marple wrapped her shawl around the shaking woman. Poirot knelt beside her. "Madame, you are safe. You are safe now." Eleanor sobbed, eyes wild with terror. No, he's coming back for me." Holmes's eyes went cold. "Who?" he demanded. "Who took you?" Eleanor shuddered violently and whispered only one word. "Reginald." Poirot gasped. "Sir Reginald Carroway." Miss Marple's eyes filled with sorrow and confirmation. "But then," Eleanor whispered again, weaker. "Not just him." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Who else?" She sobbed. The one who whispered to him, told him what to do." Poirot turned pale. "The second man, the miller." Miss Marple whispered in horror. "Thomas Reed." Holmes stood, face hard as steel. "Tonight," he said, "we confront them both." And as they carried Eleanor away from the hollow, the marsh seemed to whisper after them. A warning. A curse. A promise. Chapter 7. Rescue and Emotional Breaking Point. They carried Eleanor Ashcombe through the reeds and out of the marsh as though carrying a fragile memory out of darkness. Her soaked garments clung to her thin frame, her breath shuddered in uneven bursts, her fingers grasped Miss Marple's shawl with the desperate clutch of someone who feared even the air might betray her. Holmes walked ahead, lantern blazing through the fog. Poirot kept to Eleanor's side, murmuring calming words in French and English, his normally impeccable composure replaced by a protective urgency. Miss Marple stayed closest, stroking Eleanor's cold hand gently, whispering the kind of reassurances only an elderly village woman could give, soft, warm, achingly human. At last, the firm ground of the lane appeared beneath their feet. Eleanor's knees buckled. Holmes caught her before she fell. Poirot moved closer, shaking his head in disbelief. "She hid," Poirot muttered, "in the marsh, for days, alone. Mon Dieu." Miss Marple's voice trembled. She must have been terrified. Imagine waiting in the dark, listening for every sound, afraid it might be him. Holmes's jaw tightened. He wrapped his coat around Eleanor's shoulders. "We must get her to shelter. Mrs. Briarfield's inn is closest." Eleanor suddenly jerked, clutching Miss Marple's arm. "No, not the inn. He watches everywhere." Miss Marple bent closer. "Who watches, dear?" Eleanor shook her head wildly. "The other one, the one who whispers. He knows the shadows. He knows the hollow better than anyone." Holmes and Poirot exchanged a sharp look. Poirot whispered, "She means Thomas Reed, the miller." Holmes narrowed his eyes. "And Carroway takes orders from him, or at least guidance. This is not a simple dynamic." Miss Marple stroked Eleanor's cheek. "You're safe now, dear. We'll take you somewhere quiet." "The church," Poirot suggested. "It is neutral, protected, and Vicar Hargreaves will help." "Agreed," Holmes said immediately. "The church stands apart from village grudges, and it's the one place neither man would dare approach openly." They moved quickly, guiding Eleanor toward the church's warm yellow glow. Each step she took seemed to drain what little strength remained, her breath short and panicked, her eyes darting to every shifting shadow. Halfway down the lane, Eleanor suddenly froze. Poirot whispered, "Madame, what is it?" Her voice cracked. He knew I remembered. That night, the voices, the argument." Holmes steadied her. "Who argued?" Eleanor shivered violently. "Reginald. And—" Her throat seized. She buried her face into Miss Marple's shoulder. Miss Marple held her tenderly. "It's all right, dear. Take your time." Eleanor moaned, "I saw a lantern that night. In the fog, not mine, his." Poirot leaned in. "Whose lantern, madame?" Eleanor sobbed. The one who whispered to him, who told him how to hide it." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Hide what?" Eleanor's breath hitched. "The truth." She collapsed fully into their arms. Poirot gasped, "Holmes, she's fainted!" Miss Marple pressed her ear to Eleanor's chest. "Her heart is racing. She must rest." Holmes lifted Eleanor gently. "We take her to the church now." The bell tower loomed above them as they arrived, stern, protective, ancient. The vicar opened the door at the first knock, startled at the sight of Eleanor in Holmes's arms. "My word! Bring her inside, quickly." They laid her upon a pew near the altar. Candles flickered gently, casting warm halos against the stone walls. Miss Marple began drying Eleanor's hair with her shawl. Poirot knelt beside her, taking her hand with surprising tenderness. Holmes paced before the altar, tension radiating from him like heat. Vicar Hargreaves closed the door firmly behind them. Is she alive?" "Yes," Miss Marple said softly, but deeply frightened. Poirot added, "She has been hiding in the marsh. Someone hunted her." The vicar paled. "God have mercy! Who?" Before anyone could answer, Eleanor stirred, whispering desperately. He said, I would ruin everything." Holmes knelt at her side. "Who, Eleanor?" Her eyes opened wild, terrified. "The man who killed my child." Poirot sucked in a breath. Miss Marple's fingers froze mid-stroke. Holmes's eyes flashed, and Eleanor whispered the words that shattered the silence. "He was not a stranger." The vicar staggered back at Eleanor's words, his hand clenching around the edge of a pew. Poirot rose slowly, his face pale, moustaches trembling. Holmes leaned closer to Eleanor. Soft, controlled, dangerous. What do you remember? Eleanor's breath quivered. A shout, a splash, a lantern, 2 men. Miss Marple whispered, "Yes, dear, we know. 2 men were there." Eleanor nodded shakily. "One of them, holding my boy, he slipped toward the water." Poirot grimaced. "A struggle? Or an accident?" Eleanor squeezed her eyes shut. "I couldn't see. The fog, but I heard my baby cry." Miss Marple's hand went to her heart. Eleanor continued, voice breaking. "The other man," he whispered. "It's done. It's done. We mustn't tell her. We must protect the village." Holmes's eyes blazed. "Protect the village from what?" Eleanor sobbed. "From the truth." The church fell into a tense, suffocating silence. Poirot paced slowly in front of the altar. 2 men, one of them Sir Reginald, as the vicar believes, but the other, the whisperer. Miss Marple turned to the vicar. "Reverend Hargreaves, is there something you have not told us? Something old? Something buried?" Hargreaves shook his head violently. "I swear I don't know the second man's name, only the voice." Holmes stood sharply. "Then think. You said yourself you recognized it in recent years." The vicar visibly shuddered. It sounded like—" A loud crack echoed through the church. Everyone turned sharply. Holmes shot to the door and found the latch shaking, as though someone had tried to open it before slipping away. Poirot gasped. Someone was listening. Holmes whispered, "The second man. He followed us." Miss Marple closed her eyes briefly. "He wants to know whether Eleanor survived." Eleanor pushed up on her elbows despite her weakness. He knows I'm alive. He'll come back. He always comes back." Holmes touched her shoulder gently. "Not tonight. Not again." Poirot lowered himself beside Eleanor. "Madame, one more question. The second man, did he ever speak to you directly?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "Once, long ago, after the tragedy, he knocked on my door, said he was sorry for the village's loss." Holmes whispered, "Not her loss?" "No," Eleanor whispered. "He said the village's loss." Poirot stiffened. "The boy's death affected the village?" Miss Marple murmured, "Affected someone's position, someone's reputation, someone's standing." Holmes froze. His eyes sharpened. His mind raced. Poirot saw it. "Holmes, you know something." Holmes turned slowly toward Miss Marple and Poirot. His voice was low, cold, final. The second man was not Carroway's servant, nor an old friend. Poirot whispered, "Then who?" Holmes answered, "The miller's sudden appearance tonight was not coincidence. He followed Jonas Pike. He follows us. He follows everyone, because the miller has something to lose." Miss Marple whispered, "Something or someone." Holmes nodded grimly. "The miller Thomas Reed is the one who whispered to Carroway that night." Poirot gasped. "Thomas Reed caused the child's death?" Holmes's jaw hardened. "And he intends to ensure Eleanor never speaks again." Eleanor sobbed into Miss Marple's shawl. Poirot stood slowly. "Resolve hardening. Then we must protect her." Holmes moved toward the door, "and confront him before he confronts us." Miss Marple rose quietly. "Be careful, Mr. Holmes. People driven by old fear are far more dangerous than people driven by new anger." Holmes nodded. "Which is why tonight we end the running." The church bell tolled softly overhead. A lonely, tremulous note. The trio looked at one another. The breaking point had come, and the truth, dark, raw, decades old, waited for confrontation. Chapter 8. Cozy Ending and Moral Wrap-Up. A week had passed since the truth unraveled in Greyhaven. Since the hidden documents were found in the miller's house, since Carroway broke under the weight of years-old guilt, since Thomas Reed confessed the part he'd played in covering up the accident that caused Eleanor's child's death, and since the village at last allowed long-held secrets to breathe, Greyhaven had never looked so peaceful. The marsh no longer felt hostile. The fog drifted like a tired guardian instead of a lurking threat. Widow's Hollow, though still quiet and lonely, no longer seemed burdened with unfinished business. Even the ruined cottage foundation looked less like a scar and more like a faded memory. Eleanor Ashcombe sat on a bench outside the lantern and ivy, wrapped in Miss Marple's knitted shawl. Her face was pale but calm, like someone slowly waking from a very long and painful dream. Miss Marple sat beside her, busying her hands with her knitting needles. The gentle clicking filled the silence. "My dear," Miss Marple said softly, "sometimes the past clings because it has not been understood, but once its shape is known, it becomes easier to carry." Eleanor nodded. "I feel that now. I thought I was losing my mind, but it was only memories asking to be heard." Miss Marple smiled gently. "And you were brave enough to listen." Across the lane, Sherlock Holmes stood with Hercule Poirot, observing the village with contrasting eyes, one sharp and analyzing every detail, the other warm and quietly reflective. Poirot held his hat in his hands. "A strange affair, mon ami. So much sorrow woven in such a small place." Holmes nodded. "Human nature rarely requires large settings to create large tragedies." Poirot tilted his head. "You speak as though the villains were not villains at all." Holmes glanced toward the marsh. Reed and Carroway were weak men, frightened men. Their crime was cowardice and silence. The accident that killed the child was not deliberate, but the choice afterward to hide the truth out of fear created 15 years of suffering. Poirot sighed. "Cowardice, yes, it is far more cruel than wickedness. Wickedness strikes once, cowardice lives many years." Holmes's eyes softened. "Eleanor deserves peace. The village owes her that much." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, but she has Miss Marple now. A healing influence." Miss Marple looked up from her knitting. "I heard that, Mr. Poirot." Poirot chuckled lightly. "Then I shall not deny it." Holmes approached the two women. "Mrs. Ashcombe, you are safe now. Reed and Carroway will both be removed from positions of influence, and the law will handle the rest. Vicar Hargreaves will ensure your home is restored for as long as you choose to stay." Eleanor closed her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes, for giving me the truth I thought I'd never see." Poirot added warmly, "And perhaps, madame, you shall plant new flowers around your cottage. New beginnings, we?" Eleanor smiled for the first time in days. "Yes, I think I will." Holmes nodded approvingly. "A fresh start is often the best end." Miss Marple placed a gentle hand over Eleanor's. "Forgiveness, dear, is the final step, not for them, but for yourself." Eleanor squeezed her hand. "I'll try." Holmes looked toward the marsh path. "Greyhaven will change now. Secrets unburied tend to do that." Poirot gave an exaggerated sniff. "A healthier village, I hope. Less fog, less superstition." Miss Marple chuckled softly. "Oh, Mr. Poirot, fog never truly disappears. It simply knows when to step aside for a while." Poirot raised a finger. "Ah, a philosophical woman." Holmes smirked. "A practical one." A gentle breeze drifted across the lane, stirring the leaves and carrying with it a faint hint of lavender from the cottage gardens. The village bell chimed in the distance, slow and peaceful. Eleanor stood slowly, looking at the three legendary detectives who had saved her from silence and fear. "You've given me back my life," she whispered. "How can I ever repay you?" Miss Marple shook her head. "Live it well, dear. That's repayment enough." Poirot offered his arm gallantly. "And should the fog ever trouble you again, remember something as small as a candle can chase away a great deal of darkness." Holmes tipped his hat. "And truth, once found, rarely loses its way again." Eleanor wiped a quiet tear. "I'll remember." The three detectives turned to leave, the path ahead lit softly by lanterns as dusk settled around the village. Their silhouettes walked in calm harmony, the quiet intuition of Miss Marple, the meticulous psychology of Hercule Poirot, and the sharp reasoning of Sherlock Holmes, blending like three distinct notes in a single chord. Greyhaven watched them depart with gratitude, its fog a little lighter, its secrets a little fewer. Miss Marple looked back once. Poirot hummed a little tune. Holmes walked with the calm of a man who had restored order to a world that sorely needed it. And thus the mystery closed, not with triumph, but with restoration. A candle relit. A truth reclaimed. A village finally unburdened. And the Hollow, at last, at peace.